Hi, good evening. So a student of mine wanted me to do a little video on market failure. Market failure overall is a long topic. So in this video, at least I would like to talk about externalities. Okay, that is one way where the market fails. So when we talk about market failure, first and foremost, before we talk about market failure, we will try to understand what an efficient outcome in economics is all about. Okay, so what is an efficient outcome in economics? That's a place where you call marginal benefit equals marginal cost, okay, which is also simply known to you probably as the market equilibrium. Now, there are times in the market where the marginal benefit is not equal to the marginal cost. Now, two circumstances that we are going to talk about in this video are called externalities. One is a positive externality and the second one is a negative externality. Okay, so what happens is this. Okay, before we go and talk about externalities, there are two benefits that you need to understand, as well as there are two costs that you need to understand. Okay, the two benefits are private benefit, number one. Second one is called social benefit. The two types of costs are one is a private cost, second one is a social cost. Okay, right. So what are the four areas? Private benefit, social benefit, and private cost and the social cost. Okay, so if you get these four things right, let's talk about positive externalities first, right? Always the positive first. So if you think about a positive externality, there are so many things that we have in this world where as much as somebody receives the benefit has an spillover effect, meaning some of these areas, I will give you some examples. Okay, but before we go to the example, let's say for an example, if a factory comes into your area, your village, and if you are living in a village area, probably there is a brand new road that is being built as a result of that factory. Now, the fact that that road is being built, yes, there is a private benefit for the owner of the factory, but there is also a social benefit, isn't it? The villagers in that area can make use of that particular road. Okay, so now the point is this. The point is, if you only take into account in economics the private benefit, that is a place where we consider the market tend to fail. Okay, because that is only the private benefit that we take into account. So I'm going to take this blank piece of paper, okay, and tell you how exactly a positive externality would work. So first and foremost, guys, you have the price and the quantity and the simple market equilibrium. Okay, the simple market equilibrium where, as far as you're concerned, you have the supply curve over here, the demand over here, right? So what happens is, in this, when we take into account, so what I have drawn over here, what we take into account only in this demand curve, you take into account only the private benefit. Okay, right? So what happens is this. When you really ask yourself the question as to should we not take into account the benefit that this road does to the society overall or to the village overall, the answer is we need to also take into account the impact that this road does to the village, isn't it? Right? So what is the right thing to do? The right thing to do is for you to shift the demand curve to the right, which is what I'm doing right now. Okay, right? So you need to shift the demand curve to the right, and new demand curve will come over here. Okay, so simple as that. Now this earlier demand curve takes into account, hopefully you can see it, guys. This demand curve only takes into account the private benefit, but the second demand curve that I drew, shifting towards the right, takes into account the private benefit as well as the social benefit. Okay, so whenever you need to adjust a positive externality, that whatever it produces, the positive externality, you must shift the demand curve to the right. Okay, and then what happens is, if you notice, if you call the earlier price as 10, new price as 12, as well as earlier quantity as 100, new quantity as 120. If you notice, when you take into account the benefit that it adds to the society, you see the price goes up as well as quantity also go up. Yeah, right. So if you clearly notice this in this drawing, and I always apologize for my shabby drawing, but still for all, I hope the point is still clear. Right. So there are a few things that you need to understand about a positive externality, right? This is also the case in negative externality. We'll come to that in a little while. Now, in the case of positive externality, when it is not taken into account, what happens is market tend to underproduce. Okay, right? So market tend to underproduce. As you can see, it's 100 over here. Okay, right? And quantity increases from 100 to 120. Okay, and price also goes up from 10 to 12, right? So as far as when you take the full benefit into account in a positive externality, it has to go demand curve shift towards the right hand side. Now, generally, can you see this area? This area from earlier demand curve to the new demand curve, that area we can call it as giving a subsidy. Okay, right? This area that is highlighted over here. Okay, right? So as you can see, this gap over here, right? As you can see, demand curve is shifting to the right. That area we call it we can call it giving a subsidy. Okay, right? So one more question that I want to ask you about private benefit, or rather, sorry, about this demand curve, earlier demand curve that I drew. When we only take into account the private benefit, what else do you have? Now, if you can remember economics, that's something that you need to keep in mind. You need to also keep in mind, guys, in the earlier demand curve, the first demand curve, that was not a place where MB equals MC. Okay, right? In other words, that was not an efficient outcome. Whenever there is no efficient outcome, you will always find economic inefficiency. When you find economic inefficiency, you will find the deadweight loss. Remember that as a point. So that was about a positive externality. Okay, right. So we will talk about the negative. Now we will talk about a negative externality. A good example for a negative externality is, right? Let's say for an example, the same factory that came into the village now contributes to pollution. Okay. Right. So the problem with pollution is what? Not only the factory pays a price, but also the society pays a price. Now, when that particular price is not taken into account, that is also a situation where the market tend to fail. Okay, you're with me so far, right? So as I'm talking to you, I'm drawing the second curve, guys, right? So what is it that you need to do this time around? Remember, in the earlier example, it was the demand curve that shifted to the right. What should happen over here? Okay, in this, what should happen is that so in this outcome, right? In this particular outcome, where the outcome is not efficient, because we only take into account the private cost. Okay. We only take into account the private cost from the supplier side. What should happen? You tell me. Should the supply curve shift to the right or to the left? Or should the demand curve shift to the left or to the right? I'm sure that's a straightforward one, right? So the curve that should shift should be the supply curve, right? You're absolutely right. You need to ensure that not only you take into account the private cost, but also you take into account the social cost. So what should actually happen is that the supply curve over here should shift towards the left hand side. I hope you can see that, right? I just shifted it there, right? So then you get the brand new supply curve. Okay, right. So in this example, what happens, right? Let's look at the end outcome. I'm just taking the same numbers from earlier one, guys. Okay, so what happens is, as far as you're concerned, the price level will go up for the same product, and the quantity will reduce, let's say from 120 to 100. I'm just looking at the same numbers that I got for the earlier one. Okay, so when there's a negative externality, so if you notice this, what I have just drawn, and apologies for the shabby drawing first and foremost, I don't know whether I apologized earlier. As you can see, I'm doing this live. So what happens is, if you look at this point where I named it as price is 10 and the quantity is 120, the problem there is that market overproduces, okay, because what we take into account there is only the private cost. That's not good enough, okay. In order for it to be an efficient outcome, to take care of a negative externality, what you should do is you should also take into account the private cost as well as the social cost. So if you take a look at this again, what is the efficient outcome? Efficient outcome is the outcome where the price is 12 and the quantity produced is 100. Okay, right. So in other words, what does the early outcome do? Early outcome was, remember, when we don't take into account the social cost, we only take into account the private cost. The price becomes 10 and the quantity becomes 120. So the market tend to overproduce. Okay, so that can't happen. So if you look at my earlier drawing, this area we call it a subsidy. Okay, right. Now I'm going to shade this area. Okay, right. Can you see the shaded area now? Yeah, this area that is equivalent to a tax. Okay, right. So that is equivalent to a tax, where the supply curve in a negative externality must shift to the left hand side. Okay, so that's about it on externalities. So if I were to summarize this video very quickly, what we were trying to do here was that we wanted to understand how the markets fail. There are many ways that a market fails, but one thing that we need to understand is, one way that a market can fail is when there are externalities. Okay, sometimes there are external benefits as well as external costs. Both need to be taken into account. Otherwise, when there is a negative externality, what happens? Market tend to overproduce. When there's a positive externality, market tend to underproduce. All right. So whenever there is a positive externality, we tend to give it subsidy. Whenever there is a negative externality, we tend to give it, or when we tend to impose a tax on that kind of externality. Okay, so hope you're clear. Let me know if you have any questions. For the time being, take care, and I'll see you on another video. Bye.